Hi, everybody. It's Dr. Kristy Taylor, career and executive coach and founder of WORxK Solutions LLC. And we are back with another episode of the WORxK Solutions Podcast. And we are talking about something that is core to my heart today. If you've been following us on Facebook, you've been following us on Instagram, LinkedIn, you know this is what I talk about all the time: adaptive behavior, behavior agility. And so today's topic is behavior agility as a core leadership competency. And I'm here with a fellow veteran leadership coach and strategist. I'm excited to interview Mrs. Sutton McCraney today. And let me give you her background. I love this. Okay. So Ms. McCraney is a leadership strategist and equity researcher who trades in truth and not in trends. Preach it, right? She is the co-founder of the Flavor Room, which is an ecosystem focused on leadership identity, authority, development, and structural legitimacy for founders and leaders of color. Now, her independent research publication, Is It Legit? Redefining Equity, Leadership, and Influence in Online Business, informs her work on standards-based authority and sustainable influence. Now, in addition to all of that, she is an Air Force veteran, a former non-commissioned officer, and she has led teams in multi-million-dollar programs in high-stakes environments. And what she does is she leverages that experience into military precision. She leverages it into the private sector. It helps to equip leaders to operate with integrity under pressure. She has been featured on podcasts such as DEI After 5, Rethink Leadership, and America in Black and White. And now, of course, the WORxK Solutions Podcast. We're so excited to have you here today. So how are you?
Dr. Taylor, I'm well, and thank you for having me, and peace and blessings to the audience today.
Thank you. We're excited to talk about this topic of behavior agility and being able to adapt. I love how, as a military veteran myself, I kind of go on these tangents with veterans, but I won't do it today, right? I always just say I love how we take what we learn in the military and use it to be able to support and help leaders. And you've done that also to support and champion people of color. And so, I want to talk about the things you've done in this space, how you supported behavior agility as a leadership competency. So let's go to the first question. And so when you hear about the phrase behavior agility as a core leadership competency, what does that really mean to you from a practical everyday leadership standpoint?
Well, it means having the trained ability to shift your approach in real time. That's invaluable right now. And most leaders have a default setting, right? Naturally, you have a core setting for your leadership that you're going to default to. However, that can usually fall somewhere between command and control or avoidance. And behavioral agility is having that ability that allows you to recognize that your default setting isn't going to work for every single situation, and where you can shift gears immediately. And that's going to make the difference between being able to take your business, your team to the next level, or, hitting that wall.
Right. Now, this is behavior agility is a term that we've coined here at WORxK Solutions. But I mean, to give it to you straightforward, it's about behavior adaptability, right? Being able to do exactly what you said. And a big part of that discussion around behavior agility, and I know as I expand my research in this area, is leveraging emotional intelligence to be able to do the work of adapting and shifting. And I know with the work that you do as a leadership strategist, and I know even the work that you do in equity, and this is definitely not a political podcast, but I know from myself, about the background in health science, global health, right? And coming from that background, when we do equity, we know that equality and equity is not the same thing. Sometimes to navigate those difficult conversations, right? And even to deal with leaders that you might be coaching or working with, it's going to require you reminding them of the importance of, that emotional intelligence. Any comments on that?
No, I mean, we're seeing, all of this play out in real time. And I can't think of a better time than to learn to be adaptable as a leader and having that self-awareness, because that's the key right there. It's very really difficult to navigate difficult situations. It's so easy to become reactive, as you said, when you're dealing with difficult people in difficult situations. Like being able to pull back and say, okay, how can I shift gears in this moment that is going to be better, not only in the short term, but the long term?
And I think that's from a part of my research really focuses on behavior adaptability and being able to deal and shift with change within inside organizations, right? And having that mindset, really what it boils down to is the level of emotional of EI, as well as, that big part that is self-awareness, right? So, why do you believe that behavior agility is becoming essential for leaders? I think you kind of just already mentioned some of that, Sutton, but especially environments where change is constant, why should we be teaching behavior agility as a competence for leaders? And I'm going to take this a step further once you're done answering this first part of the question.
Because it's a liability. Being rigid is a liability. And I know you're seeing this in your work where, people are burning out. They're leaving.
Mm-hmm.
They're closing up shop all over the place. And I really believe in leaning into the Kaizen method, which I know you're familiar with, with constant
Mm-hmm.
process improvement. And oftentimes, we think of Toyota, we think of products, but you can actually apply this to your teams and people. And I used to do this in my shops, and, we do this with the flavor room as well, that constant change environment. And if your behavior is static, your business, your organization, your shop, your team, whatever, there's a plateau there.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't scale and you can't truly lead where you need to be if you are the bottleneck. So agility, this behavioral agility is important because it allows you to sustain that momentum, even as you said, when things are constantly changing. Everything is fast paced now and everybody's talking about keep up, keep up. Well, let's talk about adapting our behavior.
Yeah, one of the things that, and that's why I wanted to extend this question, because I just submitted some research around leveraging the concept of behavior agility to be able to teach it as a core competence in colleges and schools, right? Because if we're talking about not only working with current leaders, when we look at future leaders, teaching them this ideology behind being able to be adapted to situations. One of the biggest trends in people, and we're not going to stay long on this, but just want to point out, like, one of the biggest trends to the job market right now is AI, right? And everybody's like, oh, I'm going to lose my job. And I kind of tell people, it's like, if you just take a moment to see where you as a human are not going away in terms of their skill set that we bring, right? But leveraging AI as a tool. So my interest in terms of behavior agility and teaching these adaptive skills to students is kind of like, okay, we're teaching you this as a core competence, as a skill to be able to leverage emotional intelligence in the workplace and adapt to situations, but also being open. Because like you said earlier, when it comes to scaling, you have to also think. Now, the career coach in me is saying, always telling people, think about the business of you are the business of you, right? So when it comes to you being in the business of you, you even have to know how to scale that. Any feedback on that comment?
No, I want to touch on what you said about making this a core competency for the next generation. Yeah. We always talk about making it better for them, but I think this is a real opportunity to apply that, because this is something that the young people are experiencing. Fast-paced environment. And where is the skill set to really be able to adapt to those situations instead of throwing up your hands? That great example of AI, like, oh, they're going to take our job. So that's very reactive. And that's not a leader response. We figure out how to navigate and move forward. So I'm going to say this a lot throughout our conversation, but that's essential right now. I cannot stress that enough, how important it is right now to be agile in your behavior and your thinking.
Yeah. I mean, because the thing about it is, like, I was doing, when I was putting together my proposal, I actually found a piece of research that kind of countered that, right? Some of the newer studies that are coming out. Yes, AI is going to replace some tasks, repetition, right? But it doesn't necessarily, it can enhance human creativity. So I think we have to be realistic, right? It's just about us reskilling and learning how to use it as a tool. But I thought that was like a great example of, even though we talk about behavior agility in the workplace and how we use it to support and coach leaders, that's a practical example of how we can be teaching people to be agile, just even as a core competency, even when we're talking about K through 12 or K through 20, really, students who are in schools or are getting ready to enter the workplace. Now, when you talk about being behaviorally agile, how can leaders recognize the difference between reacting quickly and responding with intention?
Well, it comes down to who's in control. Reacting quickly is typically a biological response, and you are answering the immediate stimulus. There's a knee-jerk reaction, but responding intentionally requires you to take a moment and step back. And that pause, that moment of stepping back, that's where the leadership happens. It's not with that, knee-jerk reaction. In that split second, when you ask yourself, what does this situation require from me right now? That's where the behavioral agility comes into place.
Yeah, I love what you said about the biological response, because one of the things that we look at in this space is the cognitive and the biological response, right? And so the whole point here is to be able to recognize those cognitive responses first before you have some type of biological response or reactive response to that, right? And so part of this is changing your mindset and shifting your mindset and being able to look at things differently and being able to recognize what is really triggering you. And this is where the emotional intelligence piece comes in, right? Because it helps you to really recognize those triggers and to navigate that situation so that you're not having that immediate reaction, or you understand what to say it, how to approach it. When we talk about this, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to comment on what you said. This is different than what we're typically taught about leadership. This takes it to a completely different level.
Mm-hmm.
And that's important, because we've seen what the typical paradigm of leadership looks like and how that is working and how it's not working, and taking it to that deeper level of psychological safety, of cognitive response. That's going to help us in the future.
Right. I think that, there are some courses that I teach and things in terms of how I react and engage. And a lot of what we've been talking about in some of these emotional intelligence courses that I teach is something called a maturity continuum, right? And just being able to have that sense of self-awareness where you are on this continuum. And it really takes, like, I can give you all the books, and, we do this leadership coaching. We work with people. People always have their frameworks and their books. And I got shelves and shelves of books and things that, resources that I can share with people. But from a practical standpoint, one of the greatest things you can do is have that sense of self-awareness where you admit to your humanness. There are going to be things that trigger us, all right. And then you continue to work and build to improve and enhance. So I don't really look at things like, okay, this is a negative or a failure of it. It's just something that can be improved about a person, because we all have those nuances. And I think that one of the biggest steps that someone can take is just even having a sense of self-awareness, but where you are in terms of your maturity and openness to growth. If you just say, well, this is how I am and this is how I'm going to stay. Like, I think you pointed out earlier a great example. I give these personality tests, and I am a strong, what you would call goal, a person who is got to have the standards in place. I got to have a checklist, There can be a level of rigidity to my personality, right? But that when we take these personalities, that's just an element of who we are. And so, right, I have that behavior agility comes to mind because I recognize these are the things about me that can be great, but also these are the things about me that could really impact the team if I'm not being aware of how my behaviors in sphere of influence. Even speak on that, Sutton, in terms of, behavior agility and even a leader recognizing their sphere of influence. Do you think all leaders are consciously aware of that, of how they influence their team and organization and feed into the culture?
No, because it's not something that is emphasized. It's typically about, let's complete the mission. What is the bottom dollar that we're getting at here? And there's, focus on the checklist, go, go, go. How are we getting, through the next quarter from point A to point B? And we all by default know that your team is going to be the one that's going to help you get to the finish line at the end of the day. But that is often overlooked when it comes to leaders' behaviors and how that plays into it. We see that after the fact.
No, keep going.
No, I was just going to say, we see that after the fact, when things happen, then we want to say, oh, well, what was going on in the C-suite and here and there? Well, had we just took that time to reflect in the very beginning. And a lot of what we're talking about now when it comes to leadership is very introspective, which can be the most difficult part, in my opinion, because it takes a lot to look at yourself and say, where am I strong at? Where am I not so strong at? How can I improve? And that consistency of being always aware. When I was, in service, that was huge for me. what impression was I giving to my team? So.
Yeah, you said it so eloquently that it can be difficult to admit your humanness, right? Because sometimes people associate leadership with a position of title or, just the experiences that they had, and they can be good or bad. But to admit your humanness is the first of it's that self-awareness. And I think that sometimes in these discussions around leadership and adaptive behavior, we miss that simple thing, right? The self-awareness and just being okay with admitting your humanness and then working on those things that you need to improve. When it comes to behavior agility, so as we continue this discussion, I want to keep building and get into what you do with the flavor room. So based on how we have kind of laid the foundation here, Sutton, from your experience, what behaviors actually signal that a leader is adaptable and steady under pressure, and kind of what has, you've encountered in your own practice as a leadership strategist?
Thank you for that question, Dr. Taylor. The first thing is not panicking. That's something that I see a lot with founders and leaders. Is something will happen and it seems astronomical, in the business in the moment. And then there's that knee-jerk reaction to start panicking because it looks as though that they've lost control. And then the second thing is, if they have a team, the need to micromanage. Those are the two things that I often see. And it comes from a place of not having that behavioral adaptability, that agility, working on those skills when it comes to the business. So what we do in the flavor room is we challenge our members to take that space, to work on their behavioral agility. And that's through, different high-level conversations that we have. We have workshops, but also challenging them. Okay, what are you doing in your business right now? By setting the standard instead of saying, come in, you need help with your blog post. Let's talk about blog posts. No, what are we doing to take your business to the next level? Let's get out of the tactical mindset and get into the strategic mindset. Because if you want to have a team, that requires you to first be able to lead yourself. A lot of people want to just go out and get a team. Well, do you have standard operating procedures in place? Do you have a system in place? Can you manage a team? Is your communication effective enough to do so? So these are all the things that we try to prepare our members for when it comes to helping them develop that behavioral agility, but also, take it to the next step with leadership.
Yeah, running a business can be difficult. And I remember when I decided, okay, I'm going to change the name of my business and move forward. But I changed the name, but I wasn't ready to change me, right? So all of this stuff that I'm talking about with behavior agility, I hired coaches, I brought in people, and, they would be asking the same type of questions. Do you have an SOP? I don't need that. It's just been inherently difficult with a person that I've hired to help me expand a business. This is the expert, right? And sometimes I don't know if you might find that level of resistance, but after some time, when you spent enough money and had enough lessons learned, right? I love how, we've taken this concept, and this is why I say this is a core competency for any place, anytime, anywhere, because you've taken it to the fact in terms of how you're helping entrepreneurs and business owners, because it takes a lot to start a business. It takes a lot as a leader to navigate change. But going back to the example that you offered, it takes a lot to just step out on faith, but you also have to be willing to pivot. You have to be open-minded. And I don't know if you've always, like I said, I'm just being honest. Like, I was not always open to the feedback, right? And so this concept that I'm teaching and expanding on has been from many hard-learned lessons, right? About my own stubbornness and being on that maturity continuum, being on the low end of that, right? In terms of how you work with people, how you support folks with building teams and kind of in terms of expanding their dreams, or if you're going into an organization. You've led teams yourself. You've managed high stakes situations and programs, being a military veteran, and this really required you to have a level of clarity and decisiveness. I see it in how you respond. You respond in a very methodical way. You are even strategic in your response. You think about things. How did your experiences shape your ability to remain steady and adaptable under pressure?
Oh, wow, Dr. Taylor, I love that question, because I don't think I would be the woman, the mother, the wife, the business owner I am today if it were not for that military service. Quite honestly, that was invaluable. And I joined in the formative years of my life. So that really shaped, how I think and how I move. And when I was preparing for this podcast, I had to go back and think, okay, because there's been so many examples. I was like, what is a really good one I could share? And it was my last duty station, where I was running a shop that was servicing 36,000 people, and I had 17 airmen under me. And the pressure was relentless because we were connected to force support, and all eyes were on my shop. And you know how that goes. Upper leadership, they want the numbers, they want the optics, the photo ops, and they wanted yes all the time. And for the airmen that I was taking care of, that was a lot for them. These are kids to me, 18, 19. That was a lot for them. And I took that moment to say, you know what? This is where I become the buffer. This is where I adapt my leadership style and become the buffer for my team. So I told my team, you guys are trained, you know what to do. I'm trusting you to complete the mission. Don't worry about the numbers or anything like that. Just do what you do and I'll handle the rest. So when inevitably, mistakes happen, I'm the one that stood in the gaps. And I want to hone in on that, because we find a lot of people in leadership positions that are not willing to do that are not willing to hold themselves accountable. They want the praise, but they don't want to roll up their sleeves and be in the trenches with their people. And I can tell you from personal experience, when you roll up your sleeves and you're in the trenches with your people, you build trust, you build loyalty, and the output is unmatched, because now they want to work. They want to complete the mission. They want to deliver a good product. They're not being forced to. They're not afraid to. But they trust the leadership. They trust who's leading them. And so that's what happened. We won awards. The commanders got their optics. And even to this day, I've been out for a number of years. I still have airmen who contact me. They come to me for advice because they remember me, because I was a real one, because I rolled up my sleeves in the trenches. I wasn't there just go do whatever. And if it messes up, I'm going to shake my finger at you. No, we're in this together. I'll fill in the gap for you. And that goes back to that self-awareness, right? What are you willing to do for your team? What are you willing to do for your business or whatever it is to fill in that gap? That's also part of leadership.
I think the one word that really stood out to me in that was the buffer, right? Not all leaders are going to be open to serving as the buffer for their team, right? And so when you talk about standing in the gap, maybe even if you had doubts or felt pressure as a leader yourself, right, to kind of conform to whatever these standards are, that right there was behavior agility, because you could have came in under pressure. Some leaders will do that. You get pressured for these optics, you fall for that, and it impacts the morale of your team. The cohesion and the things that would really motivate your team to move forward. But instead, you made a active decision. Your situational adaptation in that case was I'm going to stand in the gap. I'm going to be the buffer, which was the most excellent decision you could have made as a leader. Because again, some people associate leadership with a title, but leadership is a characteristic, right?
Absolutely.
And that's I remember, even just going to Airman Leadership School only 5 years ago, because I'm pretty young. No, just playing. But 20 plus years ago, going to Airman Leadership School,
Right.
And we talk about these fundamental characteristics that develop as a leader, that there are some things that are innate, right? And you have to understand how to make those decisions, especially when you have a responsibility for a group or team. So yeah, I'm one of those people who, as somebody who still currently serving, I always appreciate the leadership lessons that I've gotten from my military experience.
Absolutely.
And maybe to bring it into, how I support and do this work in this space, focus on leadership development and career development. Your research, it really challenges leaders to operate with legitimacy. The title itself, is it legit? Right. I want to talk a little bit about that. It challenges leaders to operate with legitimacy and integrity rather than chasing trends. And I think that the example that you just gave in terms of how you operated as a leader, you set the tone for even the article that you wrote, because you operated in that very same way. So how do leaders, how can behavior agility help leaders stay grounded in their values while they're adapting to change? And tell us a little bit about this work, this research that you've been doing.
Thank you for asking about the research. So you can think of agility as like the suspension system in a car. Mm-hmm. So it allows you to move fast over rough terrain without losing passengers, and your values are the destination. That agility serving as a suspension is going to help you get to your destination, which is the values. And so agility protects your values by allowing you to navigate the obstacles without compromising your integrity. And so, I think that ties in perfectly to what I was just saying before about, having leadership in your ear and, being that buffer. Go ahead.
I want to just go a little bit into your independent research. Is it legit? Redefining equity, leadership, and influence, because a lot of the work that you continue to do, I'm going to ask the obvious question of what really inspired you to even write that piece of research and go this route, right? And how can people access that information and read on the research you can do? And are you continuing to do and publish independent research in this space?
Absolutely. So, is it legit? Really it was kind of a spur of a moment thing. My co-founder and I, we had just started the Flavor Room, and we said, you know what, we need to put our stake in the ground. We need to let people know that we are here, that we are serious. And I said, well, why don't we just go old school and write a research paper? So she looked at me like I was crazy. But just our background, being in the online business space, through the COVID era and all of that, we saw a lot of different things, especially as entrepreneurs of color. There were a lot of things that were happening that people were not talking about, such as, ethical sales, marketing, right? Leadership, what we have coined the illusion of inclusion, having marketing materials and sprinkling a couple of Black and brown faces on it and calling it equal, right? Call it an inclusion. So those are the things that we wanted to cover in our research, because we knew we were not the only people experiencing those things. So we spent 6 months with 24 hours of interviews with entrepreneurs from a variety of different backgrounds all over the world. And we also did our own quantitative research from, different published articles and studies. And our focus at that time was just the online business space. We said we want to look at the online business space because that's what we were focused on, those systemic issues that we found. Just because someone has a huge following and slick branding, does that mean that they are a leader? Does that make them an authority? Those are the kind of questions we were asking. And after we completed our research, what we found was that this applies in a broader sense, that it's not just the online business space, that we could take what we had researched and apply it to the corporate environment. And so that's what we've started to do.
What I love, I'm kind of taking the same approach, but what I love is that we live in a space where we're just being bombarded with so much information in terms of a blog post, the Instagram, a reel. We got to do all of this social media. And even recently myself, I said, I'm a PhD professor. Like literally my whole basis was research but I'm also a practitioner. So I'm not going to be the person that's going to write an 80-page paper, right? But this is the reason why I recently started submitting back to conferences and publishing and reviewing the most current literature on stuff. I love that you guys took this route of not only doing all of the things that you do to promote your business, but you did write an old school paper. Because I think it builds credibility. You took the time to really, it's almost like in a way you were doing the consumer research, right? In hearing some perspective and getting in the room with people and really trying to understand what is it that they want, they need, or what is being missed, right? When we talk about this legitimacy thing, right? I love, the example that you gave here about just because you put a black and brown face on a piece of marketing material, that doesn't suddenly make it equitable, or it doesn't mean equality. It just means that we're there in that space, right? So I think that it's paramount to have discussions and continue to have discussions around that, particularly for where your business is aimed. Now, in your work through the Flavor Room, you really focus on leadership and identity, and I want to make sure that we touch that. And part of the research you did was, to really, it focused on identity and authority. Because like you said, just because I have a beautiful website, that doesn't mean that I'm an authority in what I do, right? So in terms of the research that you've done and what you guys do at Flavor Room, how does a leader sense of identity influence their ability to demonstrate behavior agility or just even legitimacy, right? That sense of identity that's associated with their legitimacy or in ability to adapt, be agile.
What we're seeing time and time again with our members is identity being the anchor. For many founders of color, we are operating in spaces where we have to code switch or we have to wear a mask just to survive. Not even talking about thriving, just to survive. And so this constant wearing of the mask, it's rigid because you can't go too far one way or the other, right? Then you got to adjust that mask. And it comes down to, at the end of the day, just trying to protect the mask, just trying to protect that facade, because there is no psychological safety to be yourself. So in the Flavor Room, we're helping leaders operate with legitimacy by letting down the mask. You can come in, you can be who you are. This is a safe space that will challenge you, right? But it's a safe space where you don't have to have your identity in question, where you are walking on eggshells, afraid that if you say the wrong thing or wear your hair the wrong way, that's the end of your business, right? We don't want you wasting energy posturing. So that's what it's about.
This has been a beautiful conversation. I said this has been a beautiful conversation because of the way you say so. I always aim for a 30-minute podcast. We definitely have gone over. That is because
my apologies.
Have 1 million questions for you. No, it's because of the way your calmness and the way that you communicate things. It definitely is making me think in terms of how and what when we talk about authentic, though the importance of those spaces, right, to allow people to be authentic so that their brand is authentic. We are getting to the end of this podcast. This has been a very beautiful conversation, Sutton. I think it was a great opener into this concept of the power of behavior agility, because it can really be used in any space. Having the emotional maturity and the level of emotional intelligence is going to take to adapt. Like I said, I admitted my own flaws in terms of, I can have a level of stubbornness, right? But as I do this work and continue to support clients with it, I think that this is a skill set that can be taught in K through 20. It's something that leaders, it is for business owners, because you have to be able to understand that every situation is not going to go necessarily how you imagine it. Sometimes we encounter difficulties, and being aware of that cognitive well as that biological response, and that cognitive first, right? That's going to help you to kind of unload things in a different way and take things in a different way. Now, if you were advising emerging leaders today, what daily habit, so just one piece of advice, what daily habit would you encourage them to practice to build this behavior, adaptability, agility over time?
That's a great question. I'm going to tap into military background here and after action report or after action review. So at the end of every day, ask yourself, and this is something you can do right now for everyone who's listening, ask yourself, what was the outcome? You had a big project that you were working on, big launch. What was the outcome? What was your behavior during that big project, during that big launch, promotion, et cetera, et cetera? Did it work? And this is not to overanalyze or to judge yourself. I'm assuming your listeners are high performers, so it's easy to go down that rabbit hole, of judging yourself, but just assessing, just for what it is. What went right? How did you react? What was the outcome? And you don't need to run on autopilot. That's easy to do, but you don't need to do that. And so just taking a moment to document those things, that's going to force you to pause, like we talked about before, to pause and take a step back, practice some self-awareness, and adjust for the next day, adjust for the next big launch, the next big promotion. That is how you build that muscle, whether you're an entrepreneur or a corporate leader, is these small, actionable steps that you can do consistently.
Yeah. All right, so this has been a great conversation, Sutton. You got me very calm. I would like to just give you the platform, give you a moment. Tell us, where are you going to be? What do you have coming up next? Any future research that you have coming out? Where can people find you? And of course, we'll have all of Sutton's information in the description box. But definitely, let me give you a moment to tell us a little bit about more of what's happening with the Flavor Room and where folks can find you.
Thank you, Dr. Taylor, for having me. And first place you can go is to our website, www.theflavor.biz. That is where you can find out more about potentially being a member of the Flavor Room, but also where you can find our research. We have an interactive page where you can adjust the parts that you want to read for our research. So instead of giving the full long paper, which you can email us to request, you can go to the website and get just those snippets or, have it customized in a certain way for your readability. And we also have our own podcast, the Fully Flavored Business Podcast. It is not like any other business podcast you've ever listened to. So be sure to check that out. We are on all the major platforms and you can find that on our website as well. And as for what's coming up with us, we are coming out with an ebook that is focused specifically on the term we coined, the illusion of inclusion, when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion in the business space. So be out on the look for that. And we also have our certification program coming up in September based on our research. So from our research, we created our own business standards framework called the Legit Business Standards Framework. And now we are using that to certify business leaders who give a damn about these issues.
Great conversation. I love the work that you guys are doing. Keep up the great work and stay engaged. And again, you can check out the Flavor Room, which is at flavor.biz. And we're going to have your information in the description box. And we look forward to all of the great feedback and engagement with this podcast. And thank you again, Mrs. McCraney, for coming on today. It's been a really great conversation, very calming, and just you really even challenged me to think about some things and how I approach. I love that. I love when the guests challenge me, right? You have two experts who are learning from each other. So again, thank you for coming on. And thank you guys for tuning in. And remember, follow us on all platforms. We can find us across all platforms at WORxK Solutions, LLC. And until the next podcast, have a great day.